Hey everybody, this is Mario Deniz here, your host for the Keeping It Real Estate podcast. And today I have the one and only Jeff Kaplan. And if you don't know Jeff, he is with Kaplan Law, and he is one of the attorneys that supports the real industry the most in Central Florida. And I'm really, really excited to have this conversation and to have him here today. Hey Jeff, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, normally I like to do this sort of like an open conversation format, and we're still going to do it that way. But in a good attorney fashion, you send me sort of like an outline of topics that you really wanted to cover. And I think their topics are very important to cover.
Yeah, preparation's key, but these are two of the biggest issues that we're dealing with in the industry today.
All right. So let's start with agent compliance. By the way, I'm passionate about all of this. This is kind of what got me started doing the podcast, is that I feel the industry kind of got a little too loose for a little while. I think the mortgage industry got clamped pretty good after the last real estate meltdown. And there's been sort of some good safety nets put into place to protect people. But the real estate industry hasn't gone through that just yet.
Yeah, I think that's coming. With the regulators are going to catch on. The folks out there that aren't doing it the proper way aren't, they're being obvious about it. So when you're that flagrant, you get caught. So we'll see. The market tends to consolidate based on reputation and those sorts of variables. So we'll see how it goes.
All right. And let me just start from a very general topic, which is going to be agent compliance. And again, I did this disclaimer in the previous podcast, and I'm going to do it again. This is only the second time we're using the new equipment. So if there is any technical difficulties, if we're not talking too close to the microphone or anything like that, I ask.
Mea culpa.
Yeah, exactly. It'll get better, I promise you. It's going to be a better product going forward. But agent compliance. Let's start from the broker.
Yeah, so agent compliance. It's obviously a broad topic, a lot of variables, but the key aspects that I'm focusing on, that I've been trying to focus on over the years, is from the brokers and team lead standpoint. The folks that are in charge of, that are supervising, that have accountability for other agents that are working with them, under them, on their team, and making sure that they are aware that when their agents, whether they're a team member or whether they're just part of a brokerage, do things wrong, get in trouble, it's going to hold the people up the chain liable. And so those folks especially need to pay attention to properly documenting the relationship, making sure that they're doing the proper training and follow up, and making sure that when the regulators do come in and they do notice some issues that aren't in compliance, that the worst thing that happens is they get a slap on the wrist, they do things differently, and they move on. So these are things that folks who know me, folks that follow me on Facebook, or have seen the things that I do. I focus on making the industry better, making the real estate agents more educated, and helping them to try to be more professional. And this plays into that, not only in helping them become more professional, but in protecting the folks that are up the chain.
And so I think they don't do the best of jobs, but the brokers obviously, are the ones with most on the line. So they tend to be slightly more proactive about this stuff.
Well, they certainly need to be, but they're not. There's probably several categories. There's obviously the big franchised brokerages, and then there are the boutiques out there. And then there are the folks that they have their broker's license, their own shop, but they don't have any agents under them. They decide to go out on their own. So this focus is primarily for the middle group, the boutiques out there, because the big folks, the ones that have the franchises, they've got corporate systems in place, and whether they're complying with them or not, they're not generally going to be open to the things that I'm suggesting. So these focus on things that brokers and team leads should be doing, should have in place to minimize potential issues for them.
Yeah. And I think, just to kind of break that down a little bit, I think it's important that when someone's listening to this, they understand one thing. And it doesn't matter what brokerage you're in. If you're a team lead, even if you're in a big franchise, mega monster sort of brokerage, it doesn't mean that, there's corporate systems in place, but those corporate systems oftentimes don't deal with the legalities of the day-to-day operations of teams.
Well, and part of the key issue here is not only putting the systems in place, but it's teaching those systems to the agents, putting in a system of accountability so that you can track it, you can train it, you can correct it. Those sorts of things, no matter what size you are hard to implement the bigger you are, because you're one broker with several hundred agents, if not thousands of agents, and you just don't have the ability to police it like you should. So this is really helpful for the microcosms of agents out there, the teams, because a lot of these big firms have the teams built in, whether you're a team or group. But if you're in charge of telling somebody what to do, how to do it, and when to do it, like a team leader typically would be, you're going to be the one that gets involved when there's a lawsuit, or when there's, your agent did something wrong. Why did they do it this way? Who's teaching them? So you teach from the top, and you educate from the top down, and then you make sure the others are staying in compliance.
All right. So let's go through some of the things that a team lead should put in place.
So the key things, you need to be proactive, and you need to be thorough. The goal is to educate them, to put in a system and a culture of accountability. So whether it's having an open door policy, whether it's doing periodic reviews, once you've put these systems in place, that's not good enough. You need to make sure that they're continually educated. You need to make sure that these policies are continually updated, and you need to make sure that you have a system to follow through and to, correct things when they're not. So, for example, I have this document package that I prepare for brokers or for team leads that do this. It's a good step towards the compliance issues. So what they do is they identify the general responsibilities of these agents, including requiring basic indemnifications. You're not going to be in complete control of what they do, so you need to make sure you not only tell them what their responsibilities are, but that if they don't comply with them, they've got to hold you harmless, and they need to protect you from that. You want to highlight and reinforce the critical areas. So in these documents, there's confidentiality agreements, there's non-competes, there's the independent contractor agreement, disclosure forms, all these variables, but probably the key one form in those document packages is the agreement, whether it's a team agreement or the independent contractor agreement with the brokerage. And that's the document where we highlight the critical areas. So,
and not to cut you off,
yeah.
but so the state of Florida got a little more serious about this. And so, someone is listening to this, that it's not understanding sort of why this is a topic of conversation nowadays. The state, for a long time, there was teams being formed within brokerages representing themselves as, the ABC Realty team. Right. And the state of Florida said, that's probably not a good idea, because the consumer doesn't know how to differentiate you, the team, from the brokerage that you work under, and we want to make sure the consumer has the ability to understand what that relationship looks like if they're looking at a sign, if they're looking at a printed advertisement, and so forth. And so they put in place some rules and regulations for the marketing on, the size of the logo for the brokerage, how that has to appear on advertisement, and then the type of paperwork that it's required to be filed with a brokerage. So and that's absolutely one aspect of it, the marketing and advertising, and that's just one component of the overall compliance issues, and that's built into this set of documents.
the goal is to set up a system of rules and policies and make sure they follow them. And so throughout the years, from what I do daily, I'm dealing with phone calls, emails, texts, what have you, answering questions, and I see the problems that arise. I see the issues that are coming up, and you kind of have to pull those out. I've created 6 main categories of issues that are likely to get a broker or a team lead in trouble the most, and broken those out of the independent contractor agreement so that they're highlighted. Because it's one thing to say that you've discussed it, but you need to make sure it's been they've been beaten down with it, and they know, and they can't.
So what gets an agent in trouble? Let's have some fun.
So social media issues, intellectual property rights issues.
Social media issues. Let's break that down, because that's a big one, considering we are in social media right now.
Well, absolutely. So again, this is partly related to the new regulations, the advertising and marketing, but this particular issue, dealing with compliance with broker rules. Brokers are going to have certain requirements, certain things that they do or don't want you to do on the social media, on Facebook posts, Instagram, state regulations, and just general codes of ethics. And you need to make sure that you've made your agents aware that these exist, that there is an expectation that you'll comply with them. Not only that you'll comply with them, but that you'll learn them, that you'll keep up to date with them, and make sure you enforce them the best you can. And so this, again, breaks it out from the normal document, makes them aware of it, and addresses those sorts of things, how they're advertising, what they're posting, and again, it just solidifies it into one neat little document.
So one of the things now is that that there's a team agreement that you have to file with your brokerage that is supposed to outline some specific things, like who's the team lead. Am I correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And then who are the members of that team, and what their roles are, and the compensation that they should receive, and that's a mandate now. You have to have that with your brokerage. Am I correct?
I believe so. I mean, it's whether it's a mandate or not, and my assumption is that from a broker standpoint, that if you're paying, because you're going to be writing checks to a variety of people at a variety of different percentages based on a variety of different services, and you don't know what those are going to be unless the team lead has provided those to you. So I don't know 100%, but it wouldn't surprise me that it's a mandated part of the team process. And getting back there's several of these that are related. The social media issue we talked about, intellectual property rights, right to use, certain logos, photos, when you have...
That's a big one now.
A big issue. Just because you've paid for them doesn't mean they're yours. There are certain issues that seem obvious, but when you're out there fielding questions and seeing the stuff that's getting posted, you roll your eyes and you're wondering, where is this accountability in place? And one of these days, someone's going to post something that doesn't use the realtor logo correctly, or usurp someone's photos without authorization and puts them up there, and then there's going to get a cease and desist, and there's going to be a landslide of issues that are going to work their way up to these team leads and brokers. Yeah,
one of my concerns is that, and I love the Facebook groups. I think there's a genuine value to the Facebook groups because, as we know, sort of Murphy's Law, everything that's supposed to happen is going to happen. And in real estate, it happens on the weekends and nights a lot of times. So you don't have the ability to pick up the phone and call, Jeff Kaplan's law firm and get him on the phone because it might be 10 o'clock at night.
But there are exceptions to that.
But there is exceptions to that. Well, and the Facebook groups, what they do is it gives the ability for someone to ask that question at 11 o'clock at night or whenever, and perhaps have someone respond to it.
The problem with that is the someones that are responding to it 90% of the time are other agents. And, each group has a specific purpose for the most part, and the group the people who run the groups try to keep it tasked to that. But so the popular ones, you'll see these questions asked, and again, it's a roll your eyes and shake your head sort of situation when the question that's asked is obviously a legal question, yet the vast majority of the answers are from real estate agents. And, in the best case scenario, they're just completely wrong. And the even worse scenario, they're partially correct. They're giving partial information. And, the Facebook groups are great forums, and they're even greater for the regulators. They should hope that the regulators don't start monitoring these groups, because clearly there's so much of this unlicensed practice of law out there. That's,
that's absolutely bonkers. I mean, it's obviously I'm not a lawyer, and I notice it. I can't imagine, having gone to law school or practicing law, how much more someone like you would notice, and it drives me absolutely crazy. But to my point of the Facebook groups, I think one of the things, the unintended consequence of a Facebook group in the real estate community has been to help shitty brokers be able to keep a business going. Because now you have agents under brokers who are sipping a Mai Tai on the Bahamas 90% of the time, able to ask questions on these groups and get answers from, sometimes the wrong answers, but sometimes they get reputable, brokers or reputable agents to answer the question. Meanwhile, Mr. Broker that's in the Bahamas 90% of the time is not even aware that their agent has this issue. And it drives me crazy, because one of the questions that I keep asking myself, and I've asked it in the podcast a few times, is how many agents is enough for one broker? If a broker is not able to manage the expectations of answering questions that their agents have on the normal course of business, should they have that many agents? I mean, now we have brokers with 500 agents. Can a broker manage 500 agents?
Yeah, obviously not. So, you're rolling the dice and hoping that everybody below you that you've brought on as an agent are doing things correctly, that you have enough, liability insurance. Those are the kinds of things that you're hoping for. And you're hoping, the companies that have the 500 agents and plus, those are the corporate structures, and you hope that they, or at least they're hoping that they have the proper systems in place, the proper education to minimize the risk. But that's the best they can do if that's their model. Their business model is to bring in as many agents as possible. That's the risk that you run. So you keep it smaller. I've helped a lot of new agents, new brokers that have gone out from the existing brokerages to go out on their own. And, it's refreshing to see, occasionally, I deal with a lot of shitty agents, a lot of agents that you just can't believe have a license to do this. But occasionally you run into the ones that really love what they do. They do it well. They do it correctly. And then you have the brokers that want to go out there and do it right. So they come, they ask the questions, we put it together, we get the systems in place, we educate the agents, and, I can only do so much for them, but you kind of pound it into them that there has to be this system of compliance and follow-up, so that one day it's going to happen. They're going to do something. They're going to broadcast a client's or a customer's social security number on Facebook. It's going to happen. And you just need to make sure, okay, things happen, but, despite having this policies and procedures in place, despite you signing agreement with a non-public information writer, which explains that a confidentiality agreement, you have all these systems in place. It's not a perfect system. It's going to happen. But at that point, you've done what you can do, and you're likely to get just a little slap on the hand, versus someone out there who just starts it fresh, doesn't want to have anything, has the form FAR independent contractors agreement, and that's it.
Right, because the thought here is that if stuff hits the fan and it gets to a judge's desk, the judge is going to have some follow-up questions like, what did you do to train this agent about this particular subject? Mm-hmm. And if your answer is nothing, then that judge is probably going to be less inclined to be kind to that broker, that team lead, versus if that team lead or that broker was very proactive about making sure that they have all of their paperwork in order, that they provided the training, right, that they have signed agreements in place, then the judge is going to be like, well, it's more negligence in behalf of the agent and the broker.
Yeah, and if we replace judge with state and federal regulators, which is the more likely scenario here, that's an even worse scenario. But I went through a couple of years ago the process of getting my cybersecurity up to speed, getting all these different pillars that you hear about through the American Land Title Association for handling confidential information, handling conflicts, and there's a system that's in place for everybody to do. And I learned through that process that compliance is scalable. Meaning if you're a brokerage with 10 people, there's a certain expectation, there's a certain amount of due diligence and compliance that you're expected to deal with, versus the 400 plus groups. There's going to be a higher level of compliance requirements, a higher level of systems in place. And so just remember that as you're starting out, it's not always as daunting as it sounds. Everything is scalable. We can get you in place. And again, the key is you have little control over what your agents do, but you can educate them and you can hold them accountable by putting these, not only explaining them, but you need to have these policies in place on paper and a system of follow-up.
And that's sort of become a little bit, I wouldn't say your bread and butter, but it's been something that you talk a lot about.
I always talk about professionalism in the industry and how it's declining. And you see all the posts from these agents. You make phone calls, you don't get follow-ups. You do, there's certain issues that you keep seeing repeated over and over again that makes it clear that there's something lacking in the education process and in the licensing process. And we're hoping on our side, as a real estate attorney, to educate not only the agents, but make sure that these brokers and the team leads fully understand the issues that they're dealing with and the potential liability that they have when they just look the other way.
Yeah, I think, a lot gets made about the changes in the industry, and they're coming for us, and they're trying to take our commissions away, or, they're trying to take a cut from our industry. But, I always sort of try to think of it as a devil's advocate mentality. And, the reality is you can go to real estate school in the state of Florida and get your license, and you've never seen a listing agreement or a purchase contract right up until that point. And at that point, you have your license, you go to a brokerage, which, by the way, a lot of brokerages, as long as you have a pulse and a valid real estate license, you are in the door. And that, those people get set on the loose to go out and conduct business, to list homes and show buyers, and they're encouraged to do that. Because it's an industry that gets paid on commission, there's urgency to get that commission check, the first commission check, because obviously you're not making any money at that point. So a lot of what I, having been on the large brokerages, a lot of what I saw the focus being is, let's try to get these people making money as soon as possible. And so it was sort of like, I don't know if it was unintended or not, but it felt like we would steamroll through rules and regulations because, the odds of something coming up from that are small. And if it does happen, we'll deal with it at that point. But let's get you to that first buyer. Let's get you to the first seller. And it was such a turnoff for me because
and now the odds are increasing, and the potential liability and problems you're going to deal with are far greater. And the regulations on the team advertising, that's just the first step. The title industry has seen its share of regulations and clampdowns, and so this is just the beginning. Who knows how long it's going to take, but it's best to be proactive. When they promulgated these and published these new rules on the team advertising, they gave us through July 1, I think, of this year. You still see teams out there that are posting on social media and in their emails the XYZ real estate team or realty company, and they're just a team. They're not the brokerage. So there's, who knows if the regulators are going to get serious about it, they've got to have some accountability and some consequences.
Oh, they're definitely serious about it. So just as an anecdotal evidence, about 6 months ago, I did an ad with a news leader, which is a local newspaper, and it was just like a cover page story, and it wasn't a call to action. It was just talking about the market in general. And in there I put, the Deniz group at prefer real estate brokers, as with my phone number or whatnot. But I got a call from the board, and the board said, we received a complaint about your ad in the newspaper. And I was like, okay, have you seen the ad? No, we haven't seen the ad. And I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure it's compliant. I'm going to read it to you verbatim. I have it on my phone. This is what it says. She's like, well, if it says that, it's compliant. And the lady on the phone from the board said, Mario, I just got to be honest with you. We received more complaints over the last month, and that was, I think, somewhere December timeframe, than we did all of last year. And so ever since the new sort of team advertisement rules became into effect, like other agents have taken it as upon themselves to be, sort of calling the board with every violation that they see. And so they were like, listen, we're giving it until July, but at July this stops because we can't handle the volume of calls. So we gotta take some serious measures to make sure that everybody's compliant, so we stop getting these calls from other agents.
Yep. No, I mean, it's going to take a lot of money on the part of the boards, which isn't there. You got to have the manpower to go out there and monitor these things and enforce them. So while they look good on paper, we'll see.
Yeah, and that's just one of the things. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other things that maybe get some people in trouble. Like the unlicensed practice of law is the other one.
Yeah, I mean, probably the two most critical aspects of what I see online and what I hear from agents deals with the unlicensed practice of law and dealing with, non-public information, cybersecurity type of issues. Those are the things that are going to get these brokers and team leads into trouble the most, because those are the ones that are most heavily regulated. So unlicensed practice of law, that's a simple concept. It's hard. It's not always hard to identify, but if you're trying to teach, explain, interpret, you're most likely practicing law. If you're
writing an addendum,
if you're filling in anything, if you're having to handwrite a change or modify an existing document, you're most likely practicing law. If you're trying to help a client resolve a conflict, you're practicing law most likely. So if you have to even question whether this is right or wrong, you're most likely going to be crossing that line, and it's simply not worth it, because again, best case scenario, you're either giving completely incorrect information, or you're only giving partial information, which can sometimes be worse. Be careful. I don't see, and I don't know whose job it is to police it. I certainly, if I were, for example, to call it out on, in all these groups that I'm a participant in, 90% of the posts that aren't, I'm looking for a vendor this or vendor that, if there are issues that have come up, help me figure out what do I need to do. Anybody who responds is, essentially practicing law. And unfortunately, these forums are set up for this. And whose role is it to monitor and to police it? I don't know.
Not until someone gets made an example, right?
Well, occasionally I get into little battles back and forth with other agents when they are providing information that they say is correct, and I'm telling them, no, it's not correct. Here's why it's not correct. Yet we continue to go back and forth. So, it's forever been a problem. It's going to forever be a problem. And all you can do as a new agent or as a veteran agent is to think twice before you respond. Think twice before you give advice to a client. It's much easier to say, I don't know, but I have a real estate attorney that does.
Yeah, and personally, that's my approach. So, I think in my career, I've seen a lot of people that go to sleep at night thinking, well, I'm associated with this giant real estate company, therefore they are probably keeping an eye out for me. And so what I learned in the industry was, wait a second, they're not. They're, like, everybody's hoping that there is a next level protection. It's right. Mike Rowe talks about this, that safety first is the worst idea in the planet, because safety first makes it seem as if your safety is somebody else's problem, and it's not. Safety third is probably a good idea, meaning, you should pay attention first, and then, you don't ever rely on a safety briefing or the fact that someone must be looking out for that in the bigger scheme to conduct business. And so that's why, for me personally, I've gone away from the, this company must have my back, to the, let me keep as much of my resources as possible so that I can retain my own legal counsel, so that I can pay Jeff for the documents that I need in order to conduct business and sleep a little bit better at night.
Well, so the issue that I see happening, and it was the same issue I had when I first started, is nobody likes to tell a customer or a client, I don't know. Nobody, when they're having a conversation that involves a question, likes silence. They always want to fill it with an answer. And, I used to do that when I first started out, and then I would hang up and realize, what, I wasn't right. And, that was a much harder call to make the second time. So I learned to say, I don't know, but let me find out. It goes a long way. And, the reason the unlicensed practice of law is such a difficult thing sometimes to identify is because, if someone asks a question, but a lot of times they're asking the wrong question, or, the typical answer from an attorney is, well, it depends. Well, the depends is the key here, because depends. All right. So did A, B, or C happen? Well, they don't know to include that detail because they don't know that it's relevant, because they're not supposed to. So based on that, you have, it's like a tree that just spreads with its.
Make your own storybook, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. So that's part of it. It's not just saying, well, here's the question and here's the answer to that question. Okay. If these circumstances are true, then yes, that's correct. But you have to ask these other questions, and you have to clarify these certain things, because this is not always the true answer. And that's a lot of what you see on these groups. So,
yeah, it always also, it particularly concerns me when it has to deal with a contract, because a lot of times it's a more general question, or about, like, is this a good idea or not? But, I get particularly concerned when it's about a contract. So someone is already entered into a contract, and now we're in the middle of the process, and we're trying to figure out how to get about this one particular issue. And to your point, the questions are always asked with some sort of bias. And so,
or, I represent, you get a post from an agent that says, I've got a buyer that we're past our loan approval period, and they were approved, but now they've lost their job, and do they get their deposit back? Well,
and agents are like, yes,
right.
They get their deposit back.
Right. There's an emotional reaction.
Confirmation bias is very real in this place.
Yeah. So, and that's a key one, because the answer to that is, well, it depends.
Right.
You have to ask follow-up questions, and you have to clarify. There are circumstances where they would, legally be entitled to it, and there are circumstances where they wouldn't. So that's the part. That's why we go to school for as long as we do, and that's why we deal with the things that we deal with, because we see them from a different perspective, and we're trained to see them differently and ask different questions and flesh them out.
Yeah, and it's, again, having self-awareness is such an important skill that it lacks so much in our society, because this goes to many things. I mean, if you speak to a doctor, they probably have a similar complaint about, people self-medicating themselves or calling themselves healers or whatever.
Or God forbid, doing a Google search for.
Right. That's what that's exactly my point. That you do a Google search and you think you're a lawyer. You do a Google search and you think that you're a doctor. You do a Google search. And so, to the point is like, information is out there, which makes us
Right.
able to deal with information a little bit better. But, the caveat to that is understanding sort of where the limitations begin. It's
Right.
not knowing what you know is probably most important.
Well, and I also try to empower these agents to, a lot of one of the big reasons why they respond when they're presented with these questions or issues is because they want to feel like they're giving value. For example, I'll talk about.
Or they just watch a Law and Order episode.
Yeah, more typically because they don't want to feel inadequate. If the big most recent issue that I've had to address is, with construction contracts, new construction, complicated process. And the questions I get asked by the agents are, well, when I bring a buyer to these builders and I tell them, you need to have an attorney assist you with this, they say, well, what do I need you for then? So I empower I try to empower the agents to not only do the right thing and respond correctly, but how to explain what value they're providing. I mean, obviously there is a value to them and there's a role for them in this process, but, not just there to tell them you can or can't do this, but when you're asked to do something or backed into a corner, here's how you respond.
Yeah, and I think specifically with the new construction stuff, that's always been a touchy one because, to your point, agents always feel, if you want to feel inadequate, be a real estate agent going to a new home construction sales office where the sales rep is watched a lot of Wolf of Wall Street, so they have a complex of their own, and you have a buyer who is a very direct, very dominant personality. And so you'll find yourself very inadequate because, you have these two sort of powerful people kind of trading ideas, and you're sort of kind of sitting in the background a little bit, and it's an awkward and uncomfortable process. But
and unfortunately, you have not all of them are this way, but you have the sales agents kind of off to the side whispering into the buyer's ear, hey, if you ditch this guy, we'll lower your price.
Listen, this happened to me.
Yeah,
I don't have to go. Yeah. I don't have to reach very deep into my soul to find that one. I had a builder sales rep do this. Basically tell the buyer if they allowed her to write a different agent's name into the contract, that this agent would pay back some money towards the deal, and the agent that the person wrote in happened to be their spouse, who's not even a member of the board of realtors, but it's a real estate agent that it's part of a real estate company that sees them collecting checks while not being members of the boards. It's just bizarre. It's like the craziest world. But the builder world, I always say, and this haven't worked for a developer in the past, is they make the rules. And so it is absolute suicide for someone, especially on today's market, to not have an attorney representation. So when people, when I talk to a customer about new construction and I say, listen, let's go look at new homes, and I want to give you the expectations of what that looks like, and I'll share with them what we've run into over the last 6 months to a year. And I'll say, and a couple of the things that we're going to do is I'm going to make sure that we have an attorney review that I will pay for because I want to sleep better at night, and I want to make sure you sleep better at night. And then I want to make sure that we get a home inspection, because that's another thing. The builders try to sort of cock block that process as much as they can. So, when I get the question of someone saying, well, what do I need you for? Well, you need me because in about 5 minutes, you just figured out that you need an attorney. You didn't know that before. Now you know you need a home inspection, and what are the issues that have come up in home inspections? Those are things that you didn't know 5 minutes ago. So wait until you figure out everything that you're going to learn over the next 6 months.
Yeah, and surprise, surprise, you can modify construction contracts. When I meet with a new buyer who's looking to build, there are basically three major, components to that process. One is educating them, make sure they have proper expectations. So if you're a real estate agent that has done very little in the new construction industry, or especially haven't even built a home yourself, my opinion is you're not wholly inadequate to assist this buyer through this process. And so you're there to negotiate the price, negotiate incentives, negotiate all the packages, and help them from a marketing standpoint figure out where they want to be. But when it comes to, all right, from the buyer's perspective, I want to make sure that A, B, and C are true about this home. You need to have someone who can read the contract and make sure it's in there. And if it's not in there, how you get it in there. Make sure that you have the right to push the pause button during this process so that you have the time to get an inspector in there to do your inspections throughout the process. And to just, even in the worst case scenario where you can't modify the contract, you need to understand it. You need to understand why they put this thing in there that says they have 2 years to build your home. Nobody understands it. Scares a lot of buyers. It's really a non-issue. It's there for a specific reason. No builder wants to take 2 years to build your home because they don't get, the last dollar until it's done. So that's the value that a real estate attorney brings to the construction process. And that's probably one of the, new construction is gearing up, and you're seeing a lot more of it. So agents just need to be aware how to respond to a buyer that says, why do I need a real estate contract if I have you? And so you give them the tools how to respond. And, if at the end of the day they decide to go it alone and not hire an attorney, because it's not an inexpensive process. There's a lot involved from the contract review, from making sure that the construction process itself goes smoothly and you're dealing with issues there. And then at the end, you're doing your typical buyer review of all the documents and due diligence materials. Hey, if they choose to go it alone, as an agent, you need to make sure you've made them aware that an attorney is recommended in writing somewhere so that you've got it,
Yeah, and just to your point that an agent that hasn't dealt with this is whole inadequate to deal with it on their own. One of the experiences that I've had that this is really difficult to deal with a buyer is when they have their buddy who's an attorney. And so just like a realtor or real estate agent who has not dealt with new construction is whole inadequate, a family law attorney is probably whole inadequate to be reviewing your builder contract, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because in my experience, what I've seen them do makes me really concerned for the work that they're doing in behalf of this buyer. And so, that's one of the things a lot of times the real estate agents also, they know an attorney and they'll be like, oh, this attorney can do that. And one of the things that I like about what you do specifically is you've specialized in some of these things. You're hammering down builder contracts day to day. You're doing compliance day to day. You're working with real estate agents day to day. You're not a sort of an ambulance chasing attorney that does real estate on the side and does a closing here and a closing there and then will sue someone for insurance.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And there's a lot of that.
And the message that I try to get across to the agents, certainly I got to earn a living. I got to put food on the table, those sorts of things. But what I tell agents is, if nothing else, have your customer just give me a call. I don't charge for that. I'm more than happy to sit down and spend a half an hour with them explaining, here are the issues that you will encounter. Here are the issues that you need to look for. And here's how you need to deal with it. If you feel adequate enough to do all those things on your own and to do them correctly and timely, great. Shake your hand and you're on your way. And you as an agent have done your job. Part of what we're trying to do is shift the risk. You've got a lot of risk here. We're trying to shift it from you and your team lead and your broker. If you have an attorney involved, there's a lot of liability that's now left your shoulders because I've taken over a large part of the roles that your customer is expecting you to fill. And that's the other thing, is setting the proper expectations, because your customer is going to count on you to do a lot of things, a good bit of which you might not be legally required to do. But if you don't do them, they're going to...
It's an expectation nonetheless.
Absolutely.
And so
right.
If we're going to raise the bar, and if we are going to try to get our industry to a better place where the consumer truly understands the value of the real estate agent in the process, these are all things that need to happen. I mean, we can't... Listen, I'd love for it to be all sort of like rainbows and sunshine, and and talk really good in social media about like, yeah, we're going to do the right thing and we give red carpet service to our customer and all this other stuff. And yes, we do that. We do, we do all the blanket statements and all of those things, but there's got to be substance with it. And I think the substance that a buyer wants is understanding that they're hiring a real estate agent to be able to manage a transaction. You're sort of quarterbacking the transaction. And part of managing the transaction a lot of times is, hey, I need to bring in this real estate attorney. I need to bring Jeff in to review these documents. Or, hey, this issue came up and we now need to draft an addendum for this inspection concern. Let's get an attorney to do that. That's part of the value that I bring. And so my customers know that when they're dealing with me, I'm not going to step out of bounds and do things that are, and I say that up front to them. I provide that expectation. Hey, by the way, if in the event that we have any issues on the inspection, we need to draft an addendum. Rest assured that I'm going to retain the services of an attorney to do that in my behalf because I'm not legally allowed to do that. Right. And the response is always the same. Wait, my previous realtor did that. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm sorry to hear that. That's not what
we get that a lot. I mean, as a law firm closing agent, there are certain things that we do differently than a title company. There are time and a place for all of us, and there's plenty of business out there for everyone. But what I try to encourage agents to do, and I say, listen, put me on your team. Use me part of your advertising. Let people know that you have a real estate attorney on your team. If there's questions, he's available to chat with you. You give him a call. There's no fees for that. So just it helps provide you value. It helps to separate you from the masses, which is going to be key as we move forward in the industry because you folks are seeing pressures from all over. So, that just trying to provide the value that seems to be out there.
And I think there's a lot of attorneys such as yourself, and there's a few more in our area that are doing a good job at sort of verbalizing that to the real estate agent. We're here to provide you value. We want to help you grow your business. We want to make you better at what you do. That message, it's fairly recent. So I've been working in real estate in one capacity or another since 2005. So, it was always kind of like the Mean Girls Club in that the real estate attorneys were on their side and, they really didn't mingle with the real estate agent as much. And to your credit, you and a group of other attorneys have done a very good job at sort of saying, you know what, we're going to do things that we're going to become more approachable, more accessible.
The two basic stereotypes. One is that we're deal killers. They hesitate. I've even had agents on both sides desperately discouraging their client from hiring an attorney, from hiring me as a real estate attorney to help them through the process because they feel like we're deal killers. And so I have to get over that hurdle. I have to convince these folks, listen, I'm not here to kill your deal. I'm here to keep everybody compliant and make sure that your customer is protected. You should be welcoming me to this group, not discouraging it. And then, the value, the cost. It's, like I said, it's not an inexpensive prospect to hire a real estate attorney. You can do things, relatively inexpensively, but, it's a cost of doing the transaction that needs to be built in. And it's part of setting the proper expectations. It's part of your initial listing presentation, part of your initial buyer meeting for, buyer representation. You show them what you can provide, what value separates you from the other agent who's the other 6 agents who've already talked to them, so.
And it's easy to do because my guess is, you and I are going to be sitting in a bar 20 years from now, and we're going to be talking about stories, and we're going to look back at the days where something as simple as having a real estate attorney in your corner was sufficient to set you apart from your competition as the good old days. There's going to be a time where everybody catches up. It's the photography analogy that I've used in the past is, 2012, no one was doing professional photography. Today is the expectation. Right. 2019, very few people are using real estate attorneys for document reviews on the transactions, or even using a real estate attorney closer to close the transaction. My guess is 2025, that's going to be the standard of the real estate world. And you either start integrating, to your point, start making it scalable, meaning, I bring in Jeff to do the document reviews on, at the closing of transactions. And, you give a price for what it costs to do that and draft my initial documents for my team. And we start doing that. And then, we scale up and we say, okay, now we need you to review all the buyer side or whatever, so you come up with a plan that's scalable. When 2025 comes around and every real estate agent is trying to implement an attorney in their team, I'm already there.
Yeah, the things are not going to be, they're not going to get less complicated.
Of course.
So the more complicated things become, the more experts you're going to need involved in the process. So, I love it when when folks from New York, or there are many states out there that are they call them attorney closing states because they don't have title companies. And so, for example, New York, anytime a buyer from New York comes down, 99% of the time they make it very clear to their agent, I want a real estate attorney on my side, because that's the expectation. They're kind of shocked that it doesn't exist. So you're going to see more of that, and again, as things get more complicated, you're going to see this grow.
What's happening in the title side? Because having been around as long as I have, I remember the days where a title company would have like box seats at the Dolphin Stadium, and they would invite realtors over and do all sorts of things that have become wholeheartedly prohibited since then. But now it almost looks like there's a return to this. There's a return of the bribe. I call them welfare agents. It's welfare business. Is, you do something for me, but that has a price. We got to figure out how that's going to work itself out, financially or otherwise. And it seems to be making a fearless comeback, and it's very concerning.
Yeah, as the industry gets more competitive, we had in 08, 09, when the market tanked and real estate consolidated itself, you lost a lot of the industry companies, and now they're resurging. So the more competition there is out there, the more ways they have to find to differentiate themselves, and they start walking that fine line. You're not allowed to give anything of value for the referral of business if you're in that core RESPA group for business referrals. And so that's, what you put on a realtor happy hour. You're specifically inviting real estate agents, you're providing them a benefit. But if you put up some advertising there, you put up your marketing, you put up your banners, then it becomes a marketing event. Is that over the line? Is it not? Well, some of it's gray, doing brokers opens, those sorts of things. Yeah, you can, it's clear you are allowed to go and you can sponsor that and you can pay for it as long as you are getting a commensurate amount of marketing and exposure and advertising based on what you're spending. So there are ways around it, but there are still lots of it going on. I got a call the other day from a title underwriter, not the title company, but the insurance companies that write the title insurance, wanting me to become an agent, and made it clear sort of between the lines that, they have services that they can make available to me that I can then pass on to my agents as a, wink, wink incentive. So, there's enough, again, the goal at the end of the day is if you get caught, you get a little slap, and then you change what you're doing. So people will get more and more blatant. I think I've seen some posts on some of the groups from agents who have said they listed a property, and then within hours they get calls from 3 different title companies. We'll just say closing agents, could be any closing agent, but basically saying, if you send your closing to me, I'll give you this, or I'll cut you a check for that. Just something that's clearly crossed the line. But it's like I said, when it gets competitive out there, whether you're a real estate agent or a title company, you start questioning your ethics and compliance issues, and it's unfortunate, but I guess that's what helps to weed out the good from the bad.
It does. And, part of the problem, I think, with some of this is that in a world and an industry that relies heavily on social media, what ends up happening is that you have this sort of like unofficial spokespersons for the industry that become sort of like the arbiters of who gets to enter the industry or who doesn't, and who gets a voice and who doesn't. And rarely the criteria these folks would use is one that has to do with ethics or integrity. Typically, can you write the check?
Right.
And so, one of my concerns has always been that there's companies that literally have the financial power to come in the marketplace, put their name everywhere, throw a happy hour every week for the next 6 months. They have the resources to do that.
Yep.
And so they do that, and because they invite a few key people, we'll call them sort of like local real estate influencers, since that's the term that now gets used. Companies quickly gain this notoriety, as if that will someone maybe make them think that they're a high integrity company, or that they're doing the right thing because, well, oh my God, they're putting 6 happy hours a week and they're doing all these events, and they reserve the room at the Gaylord Palms for a real estate class. They gotta be compliant. They gotta be doing the right thing. And what I see most of the time is that the companies that are doing that are rarely the ones that are most compliant, because they're so aggressive about trying to enter the market, and they don't have any kind of market share in the beginning, that they're kind of more willing to do things. Like, you have a law practice. You're not going to give me a $200 kickback that jeopardizes your law practice and, your license to practice law,
right.
Or do all those things. So it's just a really weird thing, because in most industries, the bigger you are or the more visible you are, oftentimes means there's more accountability. There is more of a legal framework or a legal team behind it that kind of, helps you put together your marketing. But in our industry, it doesn't work that way. Big doesn't automatically mean
right.
compliant.
The reason, I certainly have my sleepless nights when I see all these posts and I see all the things that title companies and other closing agents are doing. I always remember, I'm an attorney. There are things that I can do for agents that no title company really is ever going to be able to do. You with deep pockets, you can provide the lists of customers that they need. They can help you post door knockers. They can help you create your marketing material. They can help do all the admin stuff, the marketing stuff. Are they doing that, appropriately? Are they charging the right fees for that? They can do it for you, but they have to charge you for it. You've shared posts with me where it's clearly they're charging, but it's not what it really costs.
Fair market value.
So, so what I try to, how I try to sell myself is, listen, we're not going to be able to do all that. We don't have the manpower. We don't have the deep pockets for that. But what I've learned, I've been doing this for 22 years now. Every real estate agent would love to have a real estate attorney in their back pocket that they can call anytime, 24/7 virtually, for issues, because there are always going to be issues. And I just keep that thought in the back of my mind. That's something that a title company can't replicate. They can, there are attorney-owned title companies, and yes, that's there, but that's one thing that I can always provide. So it's just a matter of getting that word out there.
And like I said, we talked about it before, and there is the examples of the states that required attorneys to be involved, and we know, like you said, things are getting more complicated, not less complicated. Chances are there is going to be a time and a place where at a bare minimum they're going to have an attorney sort of like on retainer in-house, sort of like a medical director would be in any medical facility, that they're required to have a medical director. Title companies are probably one day are going to be required to have an attorney. And my hope is actually that trickles down to real estate.
Yeah, and the reality is it's not a complicated industry. It's not complicated law that we're talking about. It's basic contract law the value that I've found that I'm able to provide is that I have just tons and tons of anecdotes. I talk to agents daily and get their stories and their issues and scenarios, and we talk through it and we can work through it. And having a legal background helps to solidify what that looks like. But then I get to share, everything that I've just learned from 10 different agents today with a whole group. So that whole group of 100 agents can now hear those different scenarios, and they can incorporate that into their database of, when the hair, I always say, if you feel like the hair's sticking up on the back of your neck, that's when it's time to give me a call. And my goal is just to teach you enough to know for that to happen. You're not going to know the answer, but you're going to know when you're about to step over into something that you shouldn't.
Yeah, identify the moment.
Right.
Identify the moment. Yeah. I think hopefully more of these conversations are had. Maybe this is not as exciting as teaching someone how to do their perfect boomerang on Instagram, but I think it's very useful for someone to be able to identify when it's time to call a real estate attorney, the things that they should and shouldn't be doing, how to provide value to your customers by affiliating yourself with someone like you, how to be able to identify this one, probably less popular in mainstream, but how to be able to identify if your broker is a knucklehead or not, because it's easy to do. Ask your broker if they have, a social media agreement in place, if they have all the things that we've talked about earlier on the podcast, if they have these documents in place, and if they don't, you probably have a knucklehead broker. And so, agents need to be able to identify that too, because you're in business with these people.
And the thing that gets me is, you have, say, a variety of different teams that are working under one particular brokerage. Well, I'll get calls from these teams to help them prepare documents, and I prepare them for them, and I prepare their disclosures. And the reality is this brokerage probably has dozens of different forms that are being used because they don't provide that resource. They need to be, this needs to be from the top down. That's why this all began, my whole campaign of trying to convince brokerages that there are compliance issues, because I see them, and it's just a matter of time before it comes back to bite them. But the broker, it's supposed to be a brokerage down sort of thing where they fund the expense. They hire me to do these documents, and then they have a system of compliance of requiring all of their agents to use these same forms. You don't deviate from them. If you're going to, you talk to the broker, and then the broker talks to me, and we tweak them. But it's consistent, and I wasn't seeing the responses that I should. So then I started reaching out to the people on the front line, the teams, the agents that are, if I can't get your broker to keep you safe and keep them safe, then I'm going to start there. And that's kind of where it's gotten me today. So, I'll continue to push it and see where it gets everybody.
Well, I am immensely grateful of the work that you do, because obviously you have the credibility and the law background, and I think it's a multi-front battle. I think there need to be attorneys doing the work that you're doing, meaning investing the time and resources to talk directly to agents ad nauseum about what they should be doing to keep themselves safe on the normal and their customers during the normal course of business. And then there needs to be agents holding their brokers accountable and holding other agents accountable, saying, hey, Susie, hey, John, I realize you've been selling real estate for a long time and you don't have these things in place, but let me introduce you to Jeff. Let me show you what he did for me. Talk to him. He can put this in place for you. And maybe instead of the brokers continuing this competition about, who can trash each other the most, who can badmouth each other the most, who can come up with the best 10-second clip for social media about the gotcha moment of the conference. Instead of doing those things or competing about who can give most commission or provide the most profits back to the agents or all these other gimmicks, get some substance. develop a competition amongst brokerages that competes in providing the agents the most resources to provide the customers with the most meaningful experience, with the most protected experience, with the safest experience. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I agree. That would be a good thing.
Well, Jeff, I really appreciate you coming in. I apologize that we had that technical issue on mid-podcast, but I thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate it. See, Jeff started a tradition. Now he came bearing gifts. If you are coming to the podcast next, I expect gifts now.
Well, I'm hoping to get invited back, so we'll see how that goes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Jeff.
All right.